Hi everyone! In today's video we'll be talking about Burp Suite Repeater. So if you didn't watch the previous video, it was talking about the basics of Burp Suite, proxy and target, scoping. Now we'll be talking about Repeater. So what is Repeater? Repeaters allows us to craft and or relay intercepted requests to a target at will. In other words, it means that we can take a request captured in the proxy, edit it, and send the request repeatedly, which is why it's called repeater, because hey, we can repeat things with it. Anyway, we could do the same thing, like we could craft requests by hand, also much as we would from the command line interface using a tool such as Go to build and send requests. However, this ability to edit and resend the same request multiple times makes Repeater ideal for any kind of manual poking at endpoint, and it provides us with a GUI, like graphical user interface, for writing the request payload and numerous views of the response, which includes also rendering engine for graphical view. So if we look at the repeater tab, or the repeater module, that's what we'll get. As the first one on the very top, we have a list of repeater requests. We can have many different requests going through repeater. Each time we send a new request to repeater, it will appear there. Then, directly underneath it, we have the controls for the current request, and that allows us to send a request, cancel a hanging request, and go forward or backwards in the request history. And here we have the request and response view. We edit the request in the request view, and then we can press on send to send the request, and the response will show up in the response view. Just above the response view is a set of options that will allow us to change the layout for the request and response views. So side by side, or one on top of the other, or in separate tabs. Then there's Inspector. So Inspector allows us to break requests apart to analyze and edit them in a slightly more intuitive way than with the raw editor. And finally, just above the Inspector, we have the target. This is the IP address or domain to which we are sending requests when we send requests to Repeater from other parts of Burp Suite. And this will be filled automatically. So now that we know what the interface looks like, we should definitely get a better understanding of how to use it. So while we can craft requests by hand to use it, it's much more common to just simply capture a request in the proxy and then send it to Repeater for editing and resending. So to send a request to Repeater, we can right-click plus send to Repeater, or we can press on Ctrl R, and then we can switch back to Repeater. We can see the request is now available. So once the request is available, the target and inspector elements are now also showing information. However, we do not have yet a response. So once we click on the send button, the response section quickly populates. If we want to change anything about the request, we can simply type in the request window and press send again. And this will update the response on the right. For example, let's change the connection from closed to open, and the results will be here. The connection on the response will have a value of keep alive. We can also use the history buttons to go forwards and backwards in our modification history. There's also something else we need to know. It's the repeater views. So there's multiple ways to present responses to our requests. and that ranges from hexadecimal to fully rendered version of the page. We can see the available options by looking above the response box where you have pretty, raw, hex, and render. The pretty option is the default option. It takes the raw response and attempts to beautify it slightly, making it easier to read. The raw response is the pure unbeautified response from the server. The hex response takes the raw response and gives us a byte view of it. It is useful if the response is a binary file, and the render one renders the page as it would appear in a browser. In most instances, the pretty option is perfectly adequate. However, it is still worth knowing how to use the other three options. And just here, we have the Show Non-Printable Characters button. This button allows us to display characters that usually wouldn't show up in the pretty or raw views. For example, every line in the response will end with the character \r\n, which signifies a carriage return, followed by a new line, and are part of how HTTP headers are interpreted. And then there's Inspector. So Inspector is entirely supplementary, so it's an extra, because if you understand how to read HTTP requests, edit HTTP requests, you don't really need to use it. However, that said, it is a good way to get a prettified breakdown of requests and responses, as well as for experimenting how changes made using the higher level inspector affect the equivalent raw versions. So inspector can be used in proxy and repeater. It appears over at the very right hand side of the window, and it looks like this. And it gives us a list of the components in the requests and responses. So if we go over each one, the request sections can nearly always be altered, allowing us to add, edit, and delete items. For example, in the request attributes section, we can edit the parts that deal with location, method, and protocol, like changing the resource we are looking to retrieve, altering the request from get to another method, like post, and switching protocol from HTTP1 to HTTP2, while the other sections, like query parameters, refers to the data being sent to the server in the URL. For example, in a GET request here, there is the query parameter redirect with a value of false, which we can change. For body parameters, it's the same as the query parameters, but instead of GET requests, this is for POST requests. So anything that we send as data in a POST request will show up in the sections, which will allow us to modify the parameters before sending them. Then there is the request cookies, which contains a modifiable list of the cookies which are being sent with each request. Then the request headers that will allow us to view, access, and modify, including outright adding or removing any of the headers being sent with our requests. And editing these can be useful when attempting to see how a web server will respond to unexpected headers. And then the response headers. So these shows us the headers that the server sent back in response to our request. We cannot edit these response headers because we can't control what headers the servers return to us. This section will only show up after we have sent the request and receive a response, obviously. And all these components can be found as text within the request and response sections. However, it can be nice to see them in this format. Now that we have a global understanding of the theory behind repeater, how it works, how to use it, let's practice. So let's put intercept as on. Then go to the website, the target. So we send this to repeater. We can do that by right clicking, then send to repeater, or just Control R. And that's what I did, and it was sent to repeater. Now that it's been sent to repeater, we can see the HTML source code for the page we requested in, so we have to send it, and we have here the response. In the response tab, the response for our request. So this is the pretty view. On the row view, here what we have, so there is a difference, a slight difference. In the hex view, this is hexadecimal with the ASCII on the right side and the addresses on the left side. And this in the middle is the hexadecimal for this. And on the render view, it will render the website as if it was in the browser. So here in the request headers, we will add a header flag authorized, and the value will be set to true. So once we add this, as you can see here, in the request it was changed to add this flag. Now we can send it again, and what we get is the flag for this part. So just before we use repeater to add a header and send a request, which is just an example for how we can use repeater. Now let's do a challenge. So in this challenge, we have to go to the products page. Before that, let me just put this in the scope. Okay, and in the proxy, on options, just the URL, and URL is in target scope. Okay, this is done, which is good. If you don't know what I just did, you can go back to the Burp Suite, the basic video that is linked down below, where I go more into depth of how to use the proxy and how to use the target module and defining target scope and so on. So let's put the intercept off and go to the projects. And now that we are on the product, let's click on see more. For example, here there's project 1, project 2. So this is project 1. Then as you can see here, it's product then 2. Probably these are using IDs, like numbered IDs, to get the response. So what we can do is see if we can get out a 500 internal server error code by changing this number at the end of the request to extreme input. That's the question. So let's do that. Put in intercept on. Now let's just do that. Sending this to repeater. Now that this is on repeater, what we get to do is we can go to the request attributes, and in the path we can modify the path to put it to 3, apply changes, send. This is no problem. So let's continue, and instead of 3, put in 4, send the request. Still okay. So HTTP 200, 5, still HTTP 200, 6, 404, not found. Let's try 0, 404, not found. And let's try a character, not found. How about -1 And here we go. So we get the 500 internal server error, and the flag should be somewhere here. Yep, it's here. Now that this is done, we'll try using repeater to do a SQL injection. So if you don't know what's a SQL injection, you can go back to the SQL injection video that is linked down below. So for this, what we'll be doing is going to about. So and in the about page, as you can see, we have IDs. So ID 1, for example, here it is, ID 1. This is ID 2, and so on and so forth. So here there is a union SQL injection vulnerability in the parameter ID. So let's just use repeater to try and get something from it. So what we are gonna do is send in the request again. Now that we sent the request, send it to repeater, go to repeater and try to add something that shouldn't work. So I added an apostrophe, and there is this internal server error. And if we look here, there is this invalid statement. Select first name, last name, PFP link, role, bio from where people where ID equal 1 code. So we know from this error message that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So what we can do is, instead of this, using the 0 first and verifying that there is no one. Yep, no answer. And so no entries found with this ID. Now that we have an answer where we know that there will be no answer from it, what we can do is add the union and then select and try to find what is the name, like the table name. No. So if you go back to the answer to here, if we look at the, okay, let's put it in Burp. If we look at here, we get select from people where ID equal 1. So this is, people is the name of the table. So what we can do is using this table and try to see what are the other column names. So here we go to the 0, union, select column name. We need 5 columns, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. From information schema dot columns where table name equal, and here we have people, and let's send it. So there is ID. If we look here, the first column name, which is ID, has been inserted in the title. Now we got the first column name, which is ID, but we want all columns to be there. So instead of using just column name, will be using the function group concat with column name, which then we'll have the other names. So ID, first name, last name, PFP link, role, short role, bio, notes. That's all the columns that are in the table people. So as before, we were able to see first name, last name, PFP link, role, and bio. The only three columns that we weren't able to see are ID, short role, and notes. Short role probably is the short form of the role, so we don't really need it. The ID is the number, it's just a number. So the only thing that we weren't able to see before is notes. So let's try and get the notes for the CEO. So the idea of the CEO, if we went back to the website, is this one. It's number 1. So for that, we'll be going here instead of group concats. We'll be selecting notes from the table. We know the table, so it's people. And what we want to know is for the CEO, so where ID equal 1, and send it. And here we go. We have the flag. So thank you for watching today's video, which was about how to use Repeater, and you'll find in the description box all the links to the different resources and material you can look at or try and read or watch. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, bye!